Hello everybody and welcome to this month's Young Professionals series by CSI. My name is Matthew Fox. I'm the Community Development Manager here at CSI, and I'm joined by my coworker Caitlin. Caitlin, if you want to say hi or anything for the group.
Hello, yes, I'm Caitlin Solomon. I'm CSI's Marketing Membership Manager, and we're excited to have you today for part 4 of our 10-part series on the project management team. The basis behind these webinars is to provide a basic knowledge in all aspects of project delivery cycle. And in this project management team series, participants are going to be exposed to all aspects of the delivery cycle, the team members, their responsibilities, and how they effectively communicate to get the job done on time and on budget. If you've joined us in the past, you were here for our other series, which were owners, architects, and engineers, and we're excited today to be talking about understanding the specifier and information managers. And we have a great panel lined up for you today. We have Andrea Zawadny, Brock Howard, Liz OSullivan, and Vivian Bowls. And Matt will be giving you their bios before each of them take the floor to tell you a little bit more about what they do and how it affects you and the project team. As always, we invite you to participate with us online. I will be live tweeting from today's webinar using the hashtag CSIYPS. So feel free to tweet any questions, comments, highlights, and of course, everyone who participates online, you get entered into winning a CSI swag bag. So hopefully a little bribery to get you guys used to live tweeting during these webinars. And you should also feel free to continue today's conversation in our CSI Young Professionals LinkedIn group. You can submit questions and suggestions for next month's call, which is Understanding the Contract Administrator as well. So we always invite you to share questions, start discussions, or any articles or different posts you've seen that you think others in this audience would like. Feel free to share it on either Twitter or LinkedIn.
So, Andrea Zawadny is an associate and a senior specification writer for the globally recognized sports architecture firm Populous. She has 20 years of construction industry experience and 15 years of experience in specification writing, procurement, and contract document preparation and construction contract administration activities. She specifies strata, arenas, ballparks, convention centers, collegiate projects, training centers, racetracks, and equestrian fairgrounds. Andrea is currently CSI's North Central Region Certification Community Chair, the Regional Director, Electronic Communications Chair, and a past president for the Kansas City chapter. She's passionate about building knowledge and improving project delivery in the design and construction industry. So Andrea, at this point, I'd like to take it over to you. You get about 5 to 7 minutes to talk a little bit about your background working in the specifying side and how you relate to the other project teams. Andrea, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Well, my background comes from, I used to work at a subcontractor eons ago in another life, and I did a lot of bidding and takeoffs, and I had to read the contracts and the contract documents in order to do that. And so getting familiar with legal language and contract documents sort of helped me get to where I am today, actually, very much so, as a matter of fact. At some point in my career, that company that I was working for ended up closing, and I went through a headhunter, and they put me with an architecture firm. And coming from a subcontractor, I thought, well, she said, I have the greatest job for you. It's at an architect. And I thought, well, gosh, that's a whole other side of the coin. And, you know, what am I going to do there? I don't know anything about architects. And so I got there, and it turned out to be a fantastic experience, one that I've really grasped onto, simply because I see things from the other side. I see things from a design standpoint and how projects go together, but then I also see things as a contractor would read them, since I used to read them for a contractor. So from an information manager, I know that term gets thrown around a lot with specifications, but an information manager is, as a specifier, you have to know a lot of information about a lot of products, and then apply what's important about the products to the project. So some projects may be simply based upon cost, lowest bidder, and some projects may be focused on quality, and some projects may be a combination of both depending on what the product is. The specifications are a part of the agreement that's between the owner and the contractor for building the project. The owner hires the architect or the design firm or the engineer to produce the contract documents, which are actually exhibits to that agreement. So the drawings are exactly what they say. They're the visual representations, but the specifications are the written part that the contract has to follow. They're the written requirements, and they usually define quality and list products, things that you can't draw. Drawings show scope. Specifications define quality. It would be really difficult, for example, to draw testing. I don't know how you would draw testing, but you could actually specify testing within a specification section. So as a specifier, I try to write my specifications based around in a manner that the contractor can understand. For example, if I receive some information from a designer that says, hey, I want this in my project, and I look it up on Google and I can't find it, neither will a contractor. So the likelihood of a mistake being made between what the owner and the designer want to have and what the contractor is willing to build may be two different things. So it's my job to try to bridge that gap, as well as be able to offer comparable products so that it can be competitively bid. A lot of my projects that I work on are not private, so they have to be competitively bid. And so I spend a lot of time researching and trying to figure out what is truly comparable in the eyes of the owner and designer. Sometimes that is based on quality and testing requirements, and sometimes it's purely aesthetics. Other times it's based on cost. So I think as a specifier, there's lots of different roles that you play for every product and every component and every assembly that's on the project. So that's it in a nutshell for me. I don't know how fast I talk there, so.
No, Andrea, that was a great overview. I know Matt's typing up some live notes, and he usually has a couple follow-ups, so we'll see if his screen can catch up with your overview here.
Well, I think I caught everything as she was going through. A couple of really good tidbits in there for the audience, hopefully, to kind of start chewing on and getting some questions in mind as we go through the call. I guess, additionally, Andrea, like you said, you had come from more of the construction side of things and the project management side of things, moving over to the design side. I guess with that, from looking at it from both points of view and kind of thinking about what we have talked about and what the intent of the series is, any feedback or ideas you have about where in the project your current role now sits? Is it much more in the pre-bid phase? Is it kind of saddling the end of the project manual being produced through the bid phase and onto the actual job site? I guess kind of a question along those lines of, you know, who's the person that tends to talk to you the most, I guess, would be a good way to ask the question.
In this office, it's the project teams, of course, because they're the ones that are most intimately familiar with their projects. And I've worked in other offices where, and I've done this several ways. Some offices have a group or a department, if you will, or even a single person that's responsible for specs for the whole entire office. And some offices have the teams that write their own specifications and use a person to help shepherd that process and keep everybody up to date with codes and that sort of thing, and product lines and that sort of thing. So I have done that both ways, and usually that information starts to trickle in at the beginning. Well, okay, not usually. Ideally, that information starts to trickle in from the beginning. Often, the team will get into so much of the drawing that they won't really think about how it's specified, and they'll wait until the middle of the project, perhaps after schematics into design development, before they even start to consider writing specifications, usually to satisfy a deliverable that they have signed on with their design agreement. So ideally, it would, I would be involved early as they're making some of the decisions, so that it doesn't, if there's something that they're deciding upon that doesn't meet code at this point, then I can, say, hey, you might want to reconsider, and it won't mess up all of their walls, for example.
All right, great. Well, I'm just fixing up some typos as I typed a little too fast. But I guess one last question for you, Andrea, knowing that it's going to lead into the next speaker. Most of your work, does it tend to be in a specification writing software or a Word document, or are you more predominantly adding this specification information directly into a digital model?
Not in the digital model, not at this point. Currently, most of our deliverable requirements are the two-dimensional drawing, or a portion of the model to be further taken and built upon. But the specifications themselves are a separate document. So yes, Word, yes, some software that helps edit that, but for the most part, it's a little bit easier to keep track of office masters and that sort of thing by doing that than letting the whole entire office grab things and put them into the model. In addition to that, because we do so many public projects, it's difficult to spec non-proprietary products by putting them in the model, because a lot of the model components are very, very specific to a particular manufacturer, and we don't want to do that.
Sure. Great, great. Well, then with that, I am going to let you be off the mic and go back to relaxing for a little bit, and I'm going to move on to our next speaker here. So hopefully the slide looks like it's going to advance twice again on me here. But our next speaker, Brock Howard. Brock is an architect and firm-wide building smart specialist for HOK, focusing on the I in BIM. He has spoken on the topic of BIM in past construct shows and regional conferences, and most recently the Specifiers practice group for me and David Sutzman and Louis Medcalf about a month and a half ago. His passion for CSI is reflected in national, regional, and local participation. Making CSI the center of the BIM conversation is one of Brock's key professional goals. So with that, Brock, I'm going to hand it over to you to do kind of the same thing we asked of Andrea.
Sure. Hi, guys, and thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit about a career path that might be a little bit different. And for those of you that are in school or about to graduate, the job that I have did not exist when I was in school. So it really shows how fast the industry is moving related to the technology and how it's impacting the profession. When I was in school, the main choice of technology that we would use was hand drafting. We were starting to get into modeling and drawing in a digital manner. But I took a keen interest in that role in the movement of the digital world, and discovered building information modeling early in my college kind of exposure. I took that on as a challenge, because at the university that I was at, there wasn't much of a liking to technology. It was more of a design school. So if you're at a technical school, less focused on design but more focused on actually building buildings, then I highly encourage you to explore the building information modeling realm, because it is a unique decision-making factor now in people's career paths. If you don't have these skill sets, you might not be able to find the job that you're really looking for. So when I started my professional career focusing on being an architect, I quickly realized that my skill sets personally were not on the ability to design. I was not a napkin sketch designer, and I was more interested in delivering the project. So the unique connection between my exposure to CSI on honestly how to do it correctly and my interest in the technology started to create a nice synergy between those. How can I deliver projects better using the technology that I'm interested in? This quickly turned into a passion, and the focusing on the technology really became the center of my career path. I moved into a role called BIM management. The older term would have been a CAD manager, but the BIM manager is doing more than software. A BIM manager focuses on process, focuses on how to improve the quality of how we're delivering projects related to the technology that it might relate to in the process. So as it relates to delivering drawings, one of the comments mentioned earlier by Andrea was the fact that we are delivering 2D drawings. That is a standard across the industry. But just around the corner, we will be starting to deliver more as deliverables. I believe models will be a center point in that discussion. In many parts of the world, including Singapore, the interest of using models for code verification. There's a growing interest in the UK for requirements for BIM deliverables on government projects. So I think it won't be too long until we're needing to deliver all of our projects in a model-based environment. The level of that information, the level of that development is being determined as an industry. There are documents and panels and groups who are starting to have these discussions, and I've been highly active in that participation. The focus of the information side, or the I in BIM as it's been termed, has really been the focus of my career in the last couple years. Really, the model-based deliverables only get you so far. And I appreciate that the comment earlier was there are some things that you just can't draw. There are some things that you just can't model, and that's really where the information comes into play. One of the things that I wish I had spent a little more time on in college was understanding databases and understanding code as it relates to code writing, XML, XSL, some of those different languages, because the industry is moving to a data-centric deliverable, and being able to understand how data is moving between project teams and across the overall project process is really the future of our industry. So if you have an interest in data and technology, if you have an interest in kind of controlling the majority of the information on a project, that's really where this the idea of the information manager, or the person who's holding the keys, if you will, to the quality of the work is where the future of the industry is moving towards. So the last year and a half, I've really been focusing on where is the information that we can harness, how can we link it to models, how can we display that using reports, how can we share that across different team members. Some of the technology that I've been focused on is more proprietary, but there are some open industry standards that we're going to start seeing in the near future. The idea of an Industry Foundation Classification, or an IFC, is a file format that is meant to be agnostic from a software standpoint. So whether you're using Revit architecture, or you're using Bentley or ArchiCAD, the different software out there, the intention is that we'll be sharing models in a format that can transfer from one model to the other without needing to worry about what software that you need to learn. So understanding that the movement towards open format is encouraging, and if you're an Android phone user, you understand how to jailbreak your phone. You understand how the interest in open formatting is so critical in how we're data sharing. Another notion of a term that's new to the industry is the information of things, or the ability to connect the internet to different devices. In many ways, we're moving to an online cloud way of communicating. And if our industry is a 2D paper-based industry, we are going to miss the boat when the whole world is moving towards data integration and cloud-based sharing. So a lot of what my focus has been on is looking towards that new innovation, that new way of delivering, and figuring out how close are we to delivering some of those different processes in the way that we work. I'm lucky enough to work at a large enough company that has been able to invest into this development and to share a lot in what we're doing with others across the world and across the industries. So if you're interested in learning more about BIM and about some of this movement in the world related to technology, there are lots of organizations, including CSI, to get familiar with. There are groups, local chapters, your different local Revit user groups, for example, might be a good avenue to look into. The AGC, if you're on the construction side, has a BIM forum where they travel around the states and have different organization meetings that focus on the construction side of BIM. And there are also a growing group of online communities. So if you're on Twitter, I encourage you to start following the leaders that are speaking at these conferences, because they tend to share a lot via social media on the things that are cutting edge and moving forward. So I threw a lot of acronyms out there, BIM and IFC and other things. So there is a lot in the movement related to the industry and how we're moving towards a digital deliverable and sharing some of this information across projects. As it relates to specifications, right now specifications are being delivered in a 2D format, a Word document or a paper-based deliverable. And it will not be too far in the future where we will be using databases, and we'll be using cloud source information to share and disseminate on project teams. So looking forward to participating with you in the future as it relates to the information exchange and improving our project process to a more model-centric deliverable. Thanks for letting me share.
Thanks, Brock. I think we're actually going to probably leave it right about there so we can get on to the next speaker here. So as hopefully my computer updates to the next slide here momentarily, maybe. We have Liz OSullivan, AIA, CSI, CCS, CCCA, Lead AP, BD plus C, NCARB, and SKIP. An independent specifications consultant in Denver, Colorado. Before she began her work as a specifier in 2008, Liz worked on a project, worked as a project architect at a small design-oriented architecture firm here in Denver. She's been a licensed architect in Colorado since 2002. Liz writes about architecture, specifications, and construction on her blog. Comments from a spec writer, for those that may want it, and maybe I can get Caitlin to pull the link to that blog and post it in the comments as we go on. And she tweets, oh, thank you, Caitlin. And she also tweets at Liz OSullivan AIA on Twitter, so feel free to always ask her some questions on there as well. So Liz, now that I have completely screwed up the meaning of skip, I hand it over to you to continue making me look bad.
Not at all. So I knew that I wanted to be an architect since 7th grade. And I am an architect today, but I never imagined that I'd be doing the work that I'm doing now. And part of that is that, you know, in 7th grade and in high school and in college, I didn't even know that specifications existed. So when people think about architects, they think about the famous ones, you know, like Frank Lloyd Wright and Mike Brady. And I never thought about fame and fortune as a kid until people started talking about being famous when I was in architecture school. And I immediately realized that being famous wasn't important to me. And I realized that this made me different from a lot of my classmates. I never imagined that I wouldn't always design, and I'm not designing today, but I always thought of design as problem solving and not art. So in a sense, I do help solve design problems, so in a sense I'm still assisting with design, but I'm certainly not designing unique buildings on my own. So I followed the typical path to licensure as an architect, or I should say atypical path. I got a 5-year Bachelor of Architecture. I had a couple of summer internships at small architecture firms, and this is where I first heard of specifications. One firm where I worked one summer had the only spec writer I knew come in one day and ask my boss some questions. So this is when I first heard of specifications, but since it hadn't been addressed in my college classes or even mentioned, I really didn't give it much thought. So my goals upon graduation were to work for a small firm, and part of that is because that's what I was familiar with. I had worked at 2 small firms during the summers, and I saw that the employees there learned a lot because they never got pigeonholed. They worked on all different phases of a project, so they got a lot of experience, which prepared them well for taking their licensure exams, which was the other goal I had upon graduation. So that was kind of what I was focused on, which is interesting because you don't need a license to write specifications, whereas getting licensed was such a focus for me for many years. It actually took me 7 years to finish all my licensing exams and become licensed upon graduation. I thought it would be 3, which is, I don't know, nobody finishes in 3, but they told us it would be 3. So while I was working at this small firm in Denver, I learned a lot. There was a lot of baptism by fire, especially when it came to my duties during construction. There wasn't a whole lot of support, and I wasn't even a licensed architect, but I was out there, observing construction, sometimes with my boss, sometimes without my boss. And I learned a lot without a whole lot of guidance, which was okay in some ways and not great in other ways. But on one of my early projects that I took over from another project manager, the drawings were going out to bid, and the weekend before they went out, my boss handed me these binders, and he said, "Here are the specs, review them." So I did. I read them, and I came back on Monday morning and I made some comment about the door hardware schedule. There were, way too many hinges specified on this one door, and my boss looked at me like I was nuts. He said, "Wow, you really read them?" And I said, "Well, you told me to." And I didn't end up doing CA on that project. That project got shelved for a few years. But the first big job that I did construction contract administration on was a very messy school addition and remodel with kind of a problem contractor, and that's when I realized how important good specifications are. I started reviewing Division 1 like you wouldn't believe. It was my guide. It was my my roadmap for how to deal with submittals, for how to deal with meetings, for how to deal with pay applications. And I didn't have much guidance anywhere else. So I realized, wow, this book, this project manual, these specifications are really important. So I became the person in my office who coordinated with our specifications consultant on all the specs or on all the projects that I worked on, whether I was the project architect or not. If I was working on that project, people knew, all right, Liz is going to talk to the spec writer. So that kind of became one of my roles in the office. Then when my husband and I decided to start a family, we decided that I wouldn't keep working at the architecture firm that I was working at. And so I started thinking about other things. Architecture, working as a project architect, is so consuming. And I just didn't see how there was going to be room for a baby and being a project architect at the same time. So I started thinking about specifications because I knew that the specification consultant that we used had an employee who had children, and she worked from home and worked on a project-by-project basis. She was a contract employee for our consultant. So I thought I'd do the same thing when my baby was about 6 months old. So when the baby was 4.5, I finally did. I had been thinking about it. I had taken the CDT exam when the baby was about 4, and I was gearing up for doing this, and ran into our specifications consultant at a former employer's open house, and he gave me some work, which is how I got my start. And writing specs was partly what I thought it would be, and it was partly completely different. I thought that it would be mostly looking at the drawings, communicating with the architect, and word processing. And it does include all these things. I review the drawings, I ask the architect questions about things that are on the drawings and things that aren't on the drawings, and I do some word processing. But when I first started writing specs, I had no idea that my work would actually involve a ton of research. I research on my own, online, and in actual books, and in manufacturers' catalogs, and in the code, various building codes. And I also get the assistance of product representatives when I have questions about their specific products, or about general questions about the types of products that they have. So it's what I'm doing today is something so different from what I imagined I would be doing, but I'm really well suited to this work, and it suits my life with kids and husband really, really well. I've learned more about architecture and the practice of architecture in the 6.5 years that I've been writing specs than I did in the 8 or so years that I was working as an architect. So it's just been a journey that I didn't expect, and I'm so glad that I've taken it.
Great, thank you, Liz. I am going to continue to move forward just so we have some time for some of the questions rolling in here. So I'm going to move on to our last speaker here, as my computer again is slowly moving to the right slide. But we have Vivian Bowls. Vivian is a licensed architect in California with over 21 years experience in practice. She's been a certified construction specifier for over 10 of those years. In her independent specification practice, VVAS, Vivian provides architectural project specifications for commercial, multifamily, and university projects. In addition, she prepares office and rollout specification masters and consults in building product marketing, including guide specifications and other product literature. She serves on CSI's editorial advisory board and certification strategic group, and is a leader in the San Francisco chapter. So Vivian, I'm going to give you again the same 5 to 7 minutes to kind of talk about your role in the project team and how you got to where you are.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for coming. I am, as I was introduced, an independent specifier, and I'm proud to announce that I have one employee. I'm very excited to be growing the firm. I have mostly architects as my clients. I've got one structural engineer, one owner, 2 manufacturers, and 1 design build prefab firm. So this sort of blended practice is nice for riding the waves of the economy, and for the diversity of it kind of feeds itself, because each of my client types benefits from my experience with the other client types. So I write lots of project specs and a couple of office masters and some guide specs. I got there, my story is a lot like Liz's. I went to architecture school and got my degree in architecture at Rice, where I was accused of writing too much on my drawings. There were other signs that I wasn't going to be a star designer. And I think the one thing that I would have liked for the professors to have believed in their hearts when they said it, they told me that there were lots of other careers in architecture besides star designer, but since they seemed to be trying to teach us all to be that, they didn't really seem to feel what they were saying. They seemed to be saying it in a way that was taking second best. Well, I don't feel that way at all about my career, because I enjoy the technical side of design, and now that I have a lot of experience in it, it's the fun part for me. So if you are hearing anything like that or if you heard anything like that in school, don't be discouraged. There really is a lot more out there in architecture besides being a famous designer. So I got my license in California, and I worked my way up in Gensler, San Francisco, from drafter through to a project architect. During that time, I occasionally got to write portions of specs, but I never really was taught. But then, like Liz, I was expecting my daughter, and so I asked if I could join the specifications team, and Gensler was just building a team at the time. So the timing was great. It was 2001. And the other reason that the timing was great was because the economy tanked rather dramatically in September. And so there was time to learn to do a new thing. So I was writing specs part-time while my daughter was small, and then rejoined the firm closer to full-time as she got older, as the economy grew again. And so I was able to grow my practice with my skill set and with the growing business again. I was at Gensler for about 7 years as a specifier, and I thought when I started it, oh, it'll round out my practice. I'll learn how to write specs, and it'll be a good thing to have on my resume to be able to do. Well, it turns out I really liked it, and I never wanted to quit. So when the economy tanked again, and I was laid off, I started a business as a specifier, and with a few growth spurts, established a successful practice. So in Twitter on the side, we've been talking a little bit about the differences between an independent specifier and a firm specifier, or what we in SCIP sometimes refer to as captive specifiers. And the advantage of being a consultant is that you have a lot more choice as to what projects you take, and the advantage to being in a firm is that you're more integrated into the team. Sometimes I have found that I get better notice and earlier project connection with my clients now that I'm an independent specifier than I did when I was with a firm, because they just assumed I would be on their team when they were ready. Since I am engaged by most of my clients when they are answering an RFP, a request for proposal, when they're first trying to land a job, they know from the beginning that they want me on their team, or they've asked me to be on their team. I'm also sometimes engaged during schematic design or design development. I discourage my clients from asking me to join the team when they only have 3 weeks left before they issue for bid, but it does happen occasionally. When an architect hires me to specify a project, I will usually start the job off with an interview so that we develop a collaboration on how we're going to document the job and what we're going to be documenting. So I'll walk through the specs and the drawings with them, develop a list of questions, and then eventually together we will I'll assemble the project manual and I'll go over it with them. Where are we with time? It must be time for me to be wrapping up and letting us all talk together. Matt?
It can be. Sorry, I was typing and I can't unmute myself at the same time.
Focus on spelling things correctly there, Vivian.
I went to school for architecture. Words aren't my friends.
This is why specifiers exist, is because some architects don't like words.
As I tell my boss, I went to design school. I can draw you what I want faster than I can explain it. Again, thank you, Vivian. I think between the four of you all now as speakers, we've gotten a pretty wide range of what might be considered or defined as a specifier or information manager within the project team. So, Caitlin, as I've been typing, I don't know if there's been any questions that have popped in through Twitter or conversations that have kind of started up that you want to bring in as we start into the Q&A session. But I will move to the next slide where we can then start taking notes to those questions as we go.
Yeah, we actually had a question to Brock that came from one of your fellow panelists, Brock, so you have lots of people engaged in this one. Sure. You had mentioned following people on online communities and on Twitter, and the question was, what integration leaders do you follow on Twitter? So if you could give us some of those resources specifically, so those that are involved in those online communities can come away with some great resources they now need to follow.
Sure, and I think in general, how I got involved with specifically with Twitter, and this might be a good way for you to think through this, what are the kinds of people that you would like to have coffee with? So that the people that you want to have a direct conversation with are the people that I tend to follow when it comes to Twitter and things that I'm trying to learn from. The individuals that I think are on the cutting edge and share extensively, I think Randy Deutsch, which is Randy, D-E-U-T-S-C-H. He's one of those individuals that is constantly sharing about collaboration, about technology, about its integration into BIM. I also would encourage when you're thinking of who to follow related to the technology side of things, if there's someone who's spoken publicly and you think that they have something of interest related to one of the speaking engagements, you might want to see what they're saying on Twitter. Some people are more active than others. On the innovation side, Marcelo, and I'm going to hammer his last name, so I'm just going to spell it out. Marcelo, S-G-A-M-B-E-L-L-U-R-I. His handle is Marcelo S-G-A-M-B. He is extremely an influential person in the industry related to using scripting, which is a new innovative way of using BIM to automate some of the design process. There are other individuals that I follow on Twitter that relate to the technology side of things. Jim Balding is a good resource. Phil Reed is a good resource, and also organizations are good to follow as well. For example, Case Inc. is their handle. Case is another technology company that works on the consulting side that shares a lot about innovation and technology around the world too. So I think in general, when it comes to social media, you want to find the people that you want to have coffee with and just follow what they're saying on Twitter. And if you find what they're saying to be of interest, follow who they're following, and you start to see the tree of the network of people that might have similar interests to you.
Okay, Brock, I attempted to find those handles, but don't think I got all of them. So I know you are active on Twitter, so if you wouldn't mind sharing those mentions later with the CSI YPS hashtag, we'd all appreciate it. And I hope that silence means you'll do it.
Sure.
All right. Well, any other questions, Caitlin or us? I have one or two that we can ask of the audience here.
Yeah, I always have a fun one that I'm interested in knowing, and I know some people that I've talked to offline often say this when talking about this panel, is what's the main thing you wish that other occupations knew about your job? So either something that's commonly misconstrued or something people don't know that's a hidden gem of what you really do. You guys gave a great overview, but if you could think of one thing that you wish all the different occupations on today's call took away, what would it be?
Specs and drawings are complementary.
That's a good one.
You can't have one without the other.
Oh, we're singing on today's panel. I love it.
I'm sorry.
Say it once and say it in the right place. Don't repeat everything that all your notes on your drawings when you have them already specified.
And one thing that's related to both of those comments is that the specs are not something you look at as a last resort. They're not something that you treat as a reference book where you can just go look for one thing. If it's in there, it's in the contract. So sometimes I work pretty closely with the structural engineers on my projects. We work, I do part of the spec sections and they do part of it. And they often leave a bunch of stuff in the master that I'm pretty sure we don't have on the project. And so I point out to them, we don't have this on the project. And sometimes the attitude is, well, it's not on the drawings, so they'll know it's not in the project, so you can just leave it in. And that's not right. If it's in the specs, according to the contract, it is part of the contract.
I agree wholeheartedly with that one. This is Andrea, and that's absolutely correct. A lot of times, architects, designers, specifiers will just leave things in there to cover them in case they need them later, and the courts interpret specifications and drawings actually as if it is said, it is meant to be said, and if it is left out, it is meant to be left out. So if you've got a bunch of stuff in there just to cover yourself, but it's not shown on the drawings, those drawings and specifications are complementary. So it only has to be in one place, and it's part of the project. So I just don't leave extra stuff in there just because you're afraid that it's not going to be covered, or you might have it later, or somebody might change their mind.
That's especially a problem in retail and rollout specifications. The exercise of removing what you're not using for that job doesn't happen as often as it should.
Agreed, and I think some of that may be just the overall time frame as to how fast those projects are going out. And even in the sports industry world, our projects are very long term, but they happen, they're documented very, very fast. They're still considered very fast track, and there's a lot of people involved. They're just on a bigger scale. So so I agree with that. A lot of times it doesn't really matter. On most projects that I think I've ever worked on, whether it's a small commercial or not, or a huge stadium, it's people leave stuff in there. They don't bother to customize the specifications to make them project specific, and that's really, really important because they are part of the agreement.
All right, I have another question for you all that's coming up on Twitter. Hold on one second, and it's how do you manage coordinating information with your engineers?
Ooh. Most of the time, if I'm lucky, I get to issue a little outline that assigns each section or scope to the engineers, and then I have a reference by which I can follow up with who's responsible for what information. Even when that doesn't happen, sort of my next best thing is to review their specs and send them comments, either for coordination comments or just plain specification management type comments. That's with many of the engineers on the projects that I'm working on. That's the main mode of our communication is, I've seen your specs, let's talk about them so that mine work with yours.
This is Liz. I treat structural and sometimes civil pretty differently from mechanical, electrical, and plumbing because from mechanical, electrical, and plumbing I expect PDFs, so I expect them to do their own stuff. I give them some guidelines ahead of time about coordinating with Division 1, and I send them a Division 1 draft so that they at least have the information. And then I review their specs, but generally only part 1, to see if they've got any conflicting information in there, information about submittals or substitutions, stuff that might conflict with the Division 1 that I've prepared. I look at their drawings, but generally only at their general notes and things like that, because sometimes they address substitutions and submittals in there also. And I send comments, and usually they're ignored. So I don't know if I'm not handling it very well or if it's just a universal issue. And then with structural engineers, and sometimes with civil, I send them the Word files. I partly edit the Word files. I send them on to them with a ton of my own notes. I tell them to turn on the hidden text so they can see the master spec notes. Master spec is the specifications software that I use. And I ask them to edit it in Word, and sometimes they redline it and send me back scans, which is sometimes better. Sometimes they edit it in Word and do a great job. And then I compile the whole project manual.
All right, we have another question. Oh, sorry, Andrea, getting some last-minute feedback.
Sorry about that, and I know we're running out of time, so I'll be brief. I just wanted to add that as a specifier that works in a firm, we usually have consultant agreements with our consultants, with our engineers, that have all of that verbiage in there that you don't touch our stuff, we aren't going to touch your stuff. And one of the things that I try to remind my teams is, look, we hired them for their expertise, and bleeding all over their documents because you think it should be different isn't really helpful right before a deadline. As well as, it's their seal on their documents. It's their responsibility, and we certainly don't want to take on any risk by telling them how to do their job, because then it would maybe affect our architect seals by giving them direction. So from a coordination standpoint, we actually have MEP coordinators. So if any of you are interested in going down one of those other options in architecture, that is another role too. You can really get into a niche of being a coordinator for a particular discipline in an architect's office as well.
I've learned so much about the different career options available from you guys today, so thank you for sharing that for everyone on today's call. We have one more on Twitter, and then I'm going to shoot over to Matt. I know he has a couple from the audience. And my last Twitter question for you guys is, how do you coordinate information with consultants, and do you share the administrative requirements?
I think that's kind of the same question as the last one. And
the answers apply, yeah.
Administrative requirements, I'm not sure what that means unless they're talking about Division 1, or unless they're talking about how do you upload to the FTP site or something. It must be Division 1.
Yeah, the timing of sharing Division 1 doesn't always work, but I do try with the larger projects to share Division 1 with the team as soon as I can. Since I'm working through the architect, sometimes that's not effective because they share it with a bunch of other stuff that the team also needs, like drawing backgrounds. But I do make an attempt to make that available. Or in the case of when I've already marked up the engineer's specs with this information is redundant with Division 1, I definitely provide Division 1 under those circumstances.
And the person on Twitter said yes, it was about Division 1. So good job there, Liz.
Okay.
Matt, do you want to take away to end the call with the last couple questions you had?
Sure. I'm actually going to kind of combine them into one as a way to kind of save some time as well. So a question I've been asking each of our last 3 professional groups, and I'll continue to ask throughout this series, is I'm going to combine it actually as, so we talked with engineers previously, and we've kind of addressed that in the last question or two here. But next month's session is going to be talking with contract administrators, which I think is very much tied into the role of the specification as the bridge between design and the actual construction project. So if you could talk a little bit about your experience, and I expect all 4 because Brock's been quiet, expect how you all work with the contract administrators, or if you actually do both specifications and construction administration. How do you address that from the point of view of the intent of the designer as well as then the wish or intent of the owner? And then finally, the end result of what the contractor is capable of doing. I don't know if that question made any sense.
It's a loaded question there, Matt. Yeah.
Really loaded.
Brock, go first.
Yeah, pick it apart as you see fit.
Well, I think in general, most of the discussion has been about a process that we've been doing for 30 years. I think the future of the industry needs to accommodate for change, and I challenge the spec writers that are on the call. How do you see your industry changing as it relates to your ability to share information with those on the construction side?
Great. Thanks, Brock, for adding another question to the end of that one. This is Andrea. I just wanted to say that from a relationship standpoint between the specifier and the construction contract administrator, I think that relationship is really important. The construction contract administrator is the person, the front man, if you will, for all of the submittals, all of the substitutions, all of the things that happen in the field, and the quick decision maker for the things that come up on the fly. So they need to be absolutely in the process. They need to understand what was specified and why, so that they can help mitigate some of those large submittals when it's clearly not even close. It was a substitution request that should have been a substitution request that came in as a submittal. Things that on a day-to-day basis have to be decided upon at the last minute. And so if the construction contract administrator is on board with the specifier, and the specifier writes the specifications so that they're clear, and anybody can pick them up and kind of understand, all right, this is what they were going for, then it makes the CA process a lot easier from the design and engineering standpoint. And as far as how it's going in the future, well, we're just going to put everything on an iPad, right?
Well, I think that's an easy response, right? If we continue with our process and we make it digital, we can put it on iPads. But I think the industry has to think through reading less. As much as we love words and we like clarifying through our wordiness, I think we can all argue that one of the reasons why construction fails is because we don't read the important documents that are intended to be read. So the way that I was kind of leading towards this is the industry is moving towards smart technology. QR codes are already old. RFID tags are already old. But a lot of the information is starting to be tied into a digital world. Think about Google Glass. Think about iBeacons and some of the new technology that's going to be hitting the construction industry very soon. Construction visors, I think, are already being tested in some parts of the country, where the intention is that you might have a live, direct communication to a series of team members rather than having to communicate through paper or through documentation. So the idea of being able to access information on the fly based on image recognition or based on codification within the products. They can scan a product that arrives on site and verify that that is what was approved via the specification. That kind of process, I think, is going to be changing the industry, and there's a lot of young, innovative people getting into the construction world, and I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the innovation happening. So in a lot of ways, those of us that are on the early side of the design process really need to pick up and catch up really quickly to keep in sync with how the construction industry is moving.
I would follow along with both what the original question was and what Brock is saying. With information needs to get more concise, and that relationships are still very, very important. My favorite teams are the ones who actually ask me about whether something complies with the spec, whether it's in my contract or not, to help them. I want to help them because I need that feedback. These are going to be the people that when they're able to double blink to get me on the phone by looking at their construction visor, that I'm going to be happy to hear from. Because they already have a relationship with me. They're already communicating about the work that I've done and how I've contributed to the project. They're already giving me feedback and involving me in the construction administration.
Something like what Brock is suggesting with visuals being used for communication, like a picture or an image or a code or something of the actual product, could cut down a lot on some of the inefficiencies that we have in construction on the contractor side. The work that I end up doing during construction contract administration is almost completely questions about submittals and substitution requests. So the questions about submittals come up when something is specified that is the right brand name but the wrong model number or the wrong product line, or a product has been replaced by something new. So if these tags could also keep up with the fairly regular rebranding or discontinuation and replacement of products, that would help out the whole team a lot. That would stop a lot of confusion on the contractor side and the architect side and the specifier side. And then for substitutions, you'd immediately know, yeah, this is definitely not what was specified. It should be treated as a substitution request. We're still going to have to talk to each other or email or do research, figure out stuff regarding substitution requests, weigh some varying factors. But and that's going to take old-fashioned ways of communication for the time being.
All right. Well, that does look like we're actually a few minutes over the hour, so I am going to cut off the questions there. Reminder to everybody, any additional questions you have, or if you're viewing this recording on YouTube and you have some questions, feel free to join us online on Twitter or our LinkedIn group to continue the conversation well beyond today's session. So with that, I did want to remind everybody, and usually I think, Caitlin, I bring it over to you at this point to wrap up the session because you're more concise than I am.
Matt likes to talk. It's not his fault. No, as Matt was saying, if you have additional questions or just want to continue the conversation, there's been a great tweet chat going on during today's presentation, and 3 of our panelists are actually involved in it as well. So feel free to ask questions, share comments, or ideas you might have using the hashtag CSIYPS. And if you want an additional question or more in-depth answers, or you felt shy sharing today, again, we do have a private CSI Young Professionals LinkedIn group that you are all welcome to join, and I will let you right in. If you have questions for Matt and I about the series, our contact information is there on the screen, including our email addresses and our Twitter handles, since we are both very active online. If you can tell, we like to use Twitter. Mark your calendars for January 22nd. Our first webinar in the new year is going to be Understanding the Construction Contract Administrators. So join us as we start to discuss the bid-build side of the project team, and we will be sending out both the January Young Professional Series Bulletin and one-off emails that will have that registration information. And with that, I just want to thank Matt for being a wonderful moderator and all of our panelists for taking the time to share their knowledge today. And I hope everyone looks forward to part 5 of this project management series teams in January.